Hi and welcome back to a new video, probably also the last video for this year. And during the entire year of 2022, we were obviously testing a lot of different components from all the different vendors, may it be ASUS, MSI, ASRock, Corsair, whoever it might be. And whenever we got to the point that we had to use RGB software, I read comments from you guys and I can totally feel you. I can feel the same pain. Then whenever you have to use any of these, there is always a problem involved. And that's why I asked you about 2 months ago to participate in an RGB survey, where we wanted to get some feedback and also some rating from you, what you feel about the specific softwares of all the big vendors. And now we are here 2 months later, and my employee Hauke, he spent 1 full month of his time analyzing all your comments and data. Almost 6,000 results in the survey, and we went through all of them, through all the comments to categorize them, to see what kind of issues can we find in each software. And today we are going to reward the worst or the most garbage software, most garbage RGB software of 2022. It's probably some kind of tradition at the end of the year that some hardware magazines or like online media are giving out rewards to the best software or to like the best product, the best hardware in specific categories to the vendors. That's more like a traditional thing. We will add to this tradition, but I can promise you this is the award you do not want to get. In another vote, we asked you to tell us which is the most common RGB software you guys are using. And this is how we selected them. And it all started with like Aquacomputer, AquaSuite, ASUS, ASRock, ASRock Polychrome, Corsair, MSI, NZXT, SignalRGB, and so on. So we will get to all of them in a second. And then Hauke went through all the results to categorize them. So for example, so we can see a difference, which one is considered maybe the worst when it comes to bloatware, which is the worst when it comes to just the user interface, which could be terrible. And for the start, we're looking at which software are you the most satisfied with? And that's already quite interesting. If you look at this chart, Aquacomputer is leading with a satisfaction quote of 30%. This means that 30% of Aquacomputer's users are satisfied with how they could use the software. And this is the best. And now just let this sink in. Because honestly, if you look at the other results, and they go from only 1.5% with Gigabyte to 14% with NZXT. Honestly speaking, to me, this is a complete disaster. If you look at this chart and you see that only 8% on average of you are satisfied with their RGB software, this is much worse than I expected. I thought that maybe like 30 or 40% might be satisfied overall, but it's only 8% of you who are satisfied with their software. This is a complete disaster. We are starting with Aquacomputer and the AquaSuite, which was, according to your vote, the least bad software in today's video. And when it comes to the AquaSuite, at least according to your vote, the worst thing about the software is that you have to pay for updates, which seems to be quite odd. And also the user interface in general doesn't seem to be user-friendly. It's a little bit too complicated and the users just cannot get through it. So that seems to be the worst thing about the software. And with this, I also want to change over to the categories quickly, because there you can see how we categorized it. And we're starting with compatibility of software. So for example, this means if the software has any kind of like software conflict with opening hardware info at the same time, or if it might be detected as a cheat software by anti-cheat of games. Compatibility with hardware means that you might encounter issues with just the hardware it's meant to be used for. So for example, that you have an MSI board with an MSI graphics card, but the card might not be detected. Bloatware means because there's often a huge amount of other stuff installed at the same time, which is something you definitely don't want to have on your system and might also slow it down. General software bugs and problems with the user interface and also just the user overview, that is the most common and also pretty much self-explaining. Paywall, missing updates, and also problems with RGB synchronization is also self-explaining. And at the end, also a lot of software seem to have issues just storing what you set. So for example, you set it to be red, you restart and it's blue. and then it's not synchronizing or it's not keeping the settings you set inside the RGB software. And going back to the Aquacomputer example, you can see the average on the bottom in blue. So for example, 14% of you on average complained about hardware compatibility issues. And with Aquacomputer, this was 13%. And this way we can determine if some of the softwares might be a lot worse than others. And in this case, you can see that it's kind of exceptionary that 30% are satisfied with the software, but they're also complaining about the paywall problem. On average, you rewarded Aquacomputer software with 3.5 stars out of 5 stars. Continuing with OpenRGB, which is the first third-party like RGB software vendor in today's video. And this is already, you can feel that when it's a third-party thing, that this might cause a lot of compatibility issues. And that's also what we are seeing, what we saw from your results. If you look into this table, that's also what I can tell from my personal experience, trying this with multiple setups and also my own personal setup. For example, I could not get my motherboard or memory to work, which works fine with Corsair iCUE, but I cannot control it over OpenRGB. So there seem to be a lot of compatibility issues with this software, but on the positive side, it's one of the, or might be the only software that is working with Linux. So that's definitely a positive thing, and it's causing almost no CPU load, so like no bloatware, and it's also not slowing down your system. That is definitely on the positive side. I expected this to perform better though, and on average you gave it 3.23 stars out of 5. Moving over to Corsair iCUE, which is on rank number 11, just slightly behind OpenRGB, and just by the sheer amount of, like the huge amount of participants for Corsair iCUE, we could see this is probably one of the most used RGB softwares out there. This is why we also had a huge amount of very specific issues for this software, but overall, I think the biggest problem you might have with iCUE is that this tries to be a software that is a solution for everything. It's not only controlling RGB, it's also setting macros for your keyboard, it's setting a DPI for your mouse, and it's also adjusting your headset. You can adjust the fan curve for your cooling. And this all together, and I can also talk about personal experience from that, it's like you're sitting mid-game and out of nowhere Corsair iCUE just crashes. If this happens, your RGB might be gone, which is not that bad. But at the same time also like your keyboard macro is gone and like your DPI setting changes. And these kind of things are very annoying with iCUE, that you have some random crashes. That's also the most listed thing from you out there, which is the most annoying. And also that it's causing a rather high CPU load compared to all the others. It's probably one of the like highest causing CPU load. And often you have problems with USB detection. So you might connect your Corsair Commander Pro with your motherboard. Everything is working fine, and you're restarting your system and the Commander Pro is gone. And you have to connect it again to a different USB slot. That is something a lot of people reported. It's interesting. And I think I can recall that I also had this issue one time. Overall, you rewarded Corsair iCUE with 3.2 stars out of 5. Rank number 10 goes to Logitech with the G-Hub. And looking back at the chart, you can see that on average, it's pretty average, that we cannot see any kind of category that is out of line. So like no bugs more than unusual, but going through the individual comments of you, it stood out that G-Hub is often detected as anti-cheat software. So a lot of users have to disable G-Hub in order to play their games, because otherwise it's detected as a cheat software. And generally speaking, it seems to not be that nice. The user interface, the usability seems to be bad. And often if you set your RGB effects, if you can find them, because often you cannot find them, and if you can find them, they're often not applied. What people most complained about is that if you have older devices and you did a software update, the devices are gone and you cannot set them anymore, which is pretty bad. It should not happen that if your like headset or keyboard, whatever, if it's end of life, it should not be excluded after a software update. That's a very bad move. And also a lot of people complained about issues with their sound devices in combination with Discord. Overall, you rewarded G-Hub with 3.15 stars out of 5. NZXT is ranked number 9 with their CAM software, and also looking into our chart, into our table, nothing seems to be unusually bad. But going through all your comments, a lot of people are complaining about that it's detected as a cheat software, so they have to close down NZXT CAM before they can start their game. This is something that seems to occur quite a lot of times, and you are very unhappy that you seem to be forced to create an account with NZXT. There is some kind of guest login, but most people just prefer to have the software completely offline, not connected to anything, no network connection, nothing. You seem to be very annoyed by this. And one thing that seems to be quite funny with NZXT is that you keep it running. In the background, everything is fine. You install different games, different applications, and out of nowhere, NZXT CAM does not work anymore. You restart your system, it doesn't power up anymore, and that seems to be something that happens quite often. And you rewarded NZXT CAM with 3.03 out of 5 stars. Looking into the table with Lian Li's L-Connect 3, we cannot really see anything unusual, but in the comments we have basically 2 parties. And one party is complaining about that there are not enough updates when they face some kind of issues with the software. And then there is the other party that complains that whenever there is an update, it's getting worse than before, which is kind of entertaining. Also, it seems to be quite difficult or not that nice to set fan curves or anything that is related to fan or pump control with the AIOs that Lian Li is using. These were the most common issues with L-Connect 3, and you rewarded 3.0 out of 5. SignalRGB is the second third-party supplier in this video. I also expected this to be better, like OpenRGB, but it also seems not to be that nice. At least from your comments, a lot of people stated that they have a ton of issues with other software running in the background, and this could only be CPU-Z or hardware info, not even talking about other RGB software, and also that you have to pay for the software, which would be fine if it didn't have the issues it has. But a lot of you stated you have experienced compatibility issues, and then you certainly don't want to pay for this. I experienced exactly the same, tried it as well on my personal rig, also could not set several RGB settings, and I'm not going to pay for it if it does not work. And that's why you rewarded it with a 2.92 out of 5. With rank number 6, Razer Synapse is bad, but not bad enough for one of these awards. We're getting to them very soon. Razer Synapse though seems to be very annoying when it comes to registration, so it always forces you to register, which is something people do not want to do. Also, if you plug in your Razer device, and it might just be a mouse that you borrowed from a friend quickly, it tells you to install the Razer Synapse software. So it's always forcing you to do something which you definitely hate, which you don't want to do. And also, I just want to remind you of, I think it was 2017, when Razer tried to implement some crypto mining into their software, and I think it tells quite a lot about the people behind the software if they try to do things like this. And I hope this was a single action and is never happening again. Razer was rewarded by you with 2.88 out of 5. Jumping into the top 5 with ASRock Polychrome RGB. And generally speaking, this software just seems to have a huge amount of very basic bugs. I was surprised reading through stuff like, if you set a static color, like you have 2 ASRock components, and you set red for the mainboard, then it's suddenly blue on the graphics card. So it cannot even set the basic stuff for the RGB components correctly. Not even talking about the effects, which are also often not working, but also the very basic RGB settings are not working. So just generally a huge amount of bugs, and I find it quite amusing that only 3% of ASRock's Polychrome users are satisfied with this software. This is complete disaster from my point of view. It's also very often detected as anti-cheat software, so not very suitable for gaming, can be very annoying, and that's why this one got 2.41 out of 5 stars rewarded from you. Now we are getting to the awards, and the first one is going to be Thermaltake. Thermaltake is actually sharing the 3rd spot with a different vendor, which we're getting to in a second. And they are basically identical when it comes to the stars rewarded from you guys. And also similar to ASRock Polychrome, it's just missing a lot of very basic functions. A lot of people were just complaining about the very basic settings. So just setting a static RGB color did not work, like influence. like incompatibility with other devices, with other software running in the background, also crashes, random crashes, again detected as anti-cheat software, and also hardware-wise that they're using proprietary connectors, which is something people are not happy about. Often the Thermaltake software seems to just randomly crash or doesn't even start up randomly anymore at all. That's why you guys are receiving the 3rd place of the most garbage RGB software in 2022. Thermaltake is sharing the 3rd spot with ASUS and their Armory Crate, aka the Aura Sync. And also from personal experience, I can confirm that it can be a very annoying software. And it also starts with just the raw basics. You install the software, it comes with a lot of additional tools you do not want to have. Then out of nowhere, Armory Crate decides or refuses to work. So it just crashes, it doesn't start anymore. And then you might decide to uninstall it, which works, but it also installs all the other tools, which are then not uninstalled. So you have to get a separate tool to uninstall everything else, which just it's like mind-blowing. How can it be this complicated, this bad? Also the user interface, not very user-friendly. It's lacking the basic functions. A lot of people complained about that they could not even set a static color with all the same ASUS components. So it's not even like a conflict, but just the basic things are not working. Not even going to talk about fan curves and stuff. This seems to be even worse. And that's why ASUS is getting the 3rd place, again with 2.37 stars out of 5. The 2nd place goes to MSI with the MSI Center and the Mystic Light. Also from personal experience, I can tell you this software can be a huge pain in the ass. I don't even know where to start, and it feels like you had exactly the same thing, because going through all the comments, all the votings from you, it's such a huge mess. It's not one individual problem. It's like, I don't know, hundreds of individual problems, which is very odd. And it starts with that out of nowhere MSI Center starts to adjust graphics driver settings. It's disabling your undervolting, which you set in BIOS, without even you noticing, or it doesn't even notify you that it's changing anything. It's changing fan speed, pump speed, all kind of different things that are not related to what we actually want to do. Because we want to set RGB, and we want to set RGB offline, which is the next thing. This software also forces you, it every single time tells you should register. We don't want to register in your shitty software. We just want to use it. We want to have a few clicks that applies a color, maybe a static color, and that's often already not working. That's what we want to have. We don't want to be forced to participate in some weird programs or whatever you offer there. We don't want to do that. We just want to set the color. That's all we want. And we want to do that without also installing a bunch of other tools where you don't even know what are these tools doing. Because if you install this, it also offers you to install maybe 20 other tools, and you have no idea what these should be useful for, and I can tell you they are not useful. Just don't install any of them. And finally, you are rewarding MSI with 2.33 stars out of 5. It is time to reward our winner for today, and you might have guessed it already. It's a Gigabyte. I will leave the award here because it's with RGB and it works. So it's most likely not powered by Gigabyte software. And they managed to get a rating of 1.9 stars out of 5. And honestly, out of over 1,000 votes, that's an achievement. That's a real achievement, because honestly, when I went through everything and ASUS had 2.4 and MSI had 2.3, I was like, that's already very terrible. That's already pretty bad. And then Gigabyte comes around the corner with 1.9. It's amazing how bad their software actually is. And honestly speaking, also to me personally, I suffered through a lot with this software through the entire year. Starting from very basic things again, that you cannot just set a static color in individual components. Then some are not detected. I could not set fan curves. I could not set pump speed. The case of Gigabyte was not detected. I had issues that the LCD was not detected for the 4080 Aorus Master, then for the 4090 Aorus Master, and like a huge amount of problems. And it already starts when you want to install the Gigabyte Control Center. Because at this point, you get a huge list of tools that Gigabyte basically tells you to install. And it's quite funny that if you try to scroll down, already the scroll down function does not work properly. And right at the bottom, you have Norton antivirus, and that already drives me nuts. Every single time I have to scroll down, disable all those useless tools where I don't even know what they're good for, because they're not going to improve anything on your system. And all that just to disable Norton antivirus on the bottom. And that just is so annoying. And like all the basic functions, as I said before, like fan curves, pump speed, and just the basic stuff does not work. The user interface is absolutely terrible and is far from being intuitive. And that's what basically everybody of you told me. And yeah, that's why you rewarded this award to Gigabyte, which I'm very happy to send over with 1.9 out of 5 stars. And honestly speaking, as entertaining as this entire thing was to me to make these awards, because we actually created them ourselves, and to tell them that, I mean, these RGB softwares, they're all so trash, it's really annoying. There is a serious thing behind this. And I just want to give you an example with my iPhone. I'm actually using an iPhone and I don't like Apple. I don't even like the product itself. I don't even like the hardware, because there are like 5 other phones I would buy instead of an iPhone which has better hardware. But the software on this works. And that's the only reason why I'm using this. And you can also translate this to PC hardware. For example, you decide to build your new system. You buy all your components, hardware, like motherboard, VGA, whatever. And then you spend several hours building the PC. And nowadays it's honestly quite complicated to find a board that is completely terrible, that doesn't work, or like a GPU that doesn't work. But overall speaking, hardware most of the time is fine. So you are in contact with your hardware for a few hours. And then you put them in your system and you kind of forget about the hardware, because in an ideal world, it will just work fine and you will not be faced with issues. And then you install your RGB software. And on a daily basis, it's going to annoy you. And that's also one of the most comments I read under every single RGB software or vendor. And the comment was that somebody owned hardware from one vendor and he changed to another one because the software was so annoying. And it changed from ASUS to Gigabyte, it changed from Gigabyte to MSI, it changed from MSI to Corsair. It's like a circle. And the thing is, there is no software you can recommend. There is no software that's perfect. And you are losing your customers because your software is so terrible. And you should finally notice this. It's about time, it's 2022, and it sometimes feels like it's getting worse. And it could be so simple, because all we need is a very basic software. It does not need all those additional tools. Nobody needs them. Like, just get rid of all those marketing, like additional programs that nobody needs, especially the bloatware stuff, but just have a software that can do the basic settings. Just apply colors. We don't need 35 RGB effects. Just have the basics, have them working, allow to set a fan curve, and that's it. Don't have your tool requiring 800 megabytes of size and doing what God knows what in the background. We don't want that. We don't want to register to do some online stuff. We want to have it offline. Nobody needs all of this. Several thousand people have exactly the same opinion as I have, and you should fix your stuff. Otherwise, you will just hurt yourself in the future. And instead of just calling me again, because I know exactly that's what's going to happen, vendors are going to call me over this video and then they're talking like, yeah, but this is not so bad and this is not so bad. I don't care. It's you who are losing customers. It's not me who is losing the customers. So if you do not want to see that your software is terrible, it's your own problem. You should see it. If you don't, that's your problem. I'm happy that I will send out these awards to the vendors next week. Let's see what happens. I don't have high hopes, but yeah, it's never too late for changes. And if we do not see or hear each other again this year, I wish you a good start into the new year and see you soon. Bye-bye.